Hey Peter, so I'm gonna do my response in a video. I don't have a good place to set my phone right now, so I'm just gonna leave it right here. So there's not really anything to look at, but you're just gonna have to listen to my words because I think it's a lot easier to film a video. Um, yeah, I agreed with a lot of what you were saying. And I think that you had some really interesting insights that also reached into some different places and tackled different issues. Um, Definitely, you're right with the crossroads thing. Like the 4 years, like look where we ended up. We're barely recognizable. Another four, we will fundamentally be a different country, and this is our sort of chance to see what kind of country we will be. I think outside of the Civil War, there have been few other moments so, and I guess the Revolutionary War, but there's few other moments so defining to what the character and being of the country of the United States of America will be as now. I definitely 100% agree that Trump's rise was a backlash due to the election of Obama and pretty much the more progressive, I'd say in quotation, people getting what they want, and then the people that didn't agree with that. Like, I see a pendulum because no one really knows what they want. They think they want something, and once they get it, it's not what they want, so they want to go back. So it's always shifting. Like people wanted Obama because he was more progressive, and then they had him, and then they were like, oh no, that didn't work in my idealized perfect way. That didn't work exactly how in my mind it could have worked. So we got to try something else. And my hope out of all that is they'll do the same thing with Trump, and it will swing back into a sane direction. That would be their, yeah, definitely intolerance will always be there. Yeah, sorry, I'm like reading it and trying to apply, so some of this might be disjointed, but it's live, so whatever. I like that you had a source that you cited, um, and I haven't really heard this before, but I think it's a really interesting idea that unlimited tolerance will inevitably lead to the destruction of tolerance because um, like you said, unlimited tolerance means like literally everyone in the. I mean, you're saying it more eloquently than I am, but like if everyone's tolerated, then the people with the worst voices will be tolerated, and they'll have an equal seat at the table, and that'll just be a mess because the entire concept of tolerance would be negated by the fact that everyone is there. I don't know why I'm having a hard time saying it as eloquently as you did, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. Definitely the active and passive tolerance, where it's like, I think passive tolerance is what we're taught. Passive tolerance is the you should accept people of all everything ever, and it's weird to say no to that, but when I'm saying no, I'm talking about like Nazis and QAnon and racists. I'm not like you should be, you know, you know what I mean. Sorry, this is so distracting. You know who I am. I'm trying my best here. Um. Anyway, yeah, we're definitely taught to live in a passively tolerant society where it's like, oh, just accept everyone. And then when you're accepting everyone, you don't learn how to reject the things that actively oppose the rights and freedoms of other people. Um, yeah, so actively tolerant society is definitely ideal. Um, it's really the only way that works is that because passively tolerant, then all the crazy people do whatever, and passive tolerance led to Donald Trump because no one. I mean, while there was smoke and thunder, I feel like during his campaign and like every second it's like, all right, he can't possibly survive this, and it's like continued every second he can't possibly survive this. It's like we are passively tolerating it. There was no point where someone's like, okay, this can't happen. Yeah, it was just like, well, I guess we have to accept this. Sorry, I read it once. So this was like my second run through. Um, I mean, yeah, everything you're saying here, I 100% agree with. Um, yeah, exactly. The true threat, criminal threatening thing, and the ideologies of white supremacism and Nazism is violence, oppression, extermination, and in a passively tolerant society, as we're taught, I don't think anyone's ever explicitly said you have to tolerate Nazis, but no one's made it. It's not illegal to be a Nazi. So they can get in there and they can, especially because they're a minority, or they like to think of themselves a minority or underdog, they use that power like, oh, they're trying to keep us down. And then they rally around that, and because they're passively tolerant, when they rise, they're like, oh, how did this happen? It's like, well, you weren't stopping it from happening. Exactly. Um, yeah, remember, while individual threats, political opinions to be protected and tolerated. That one's tricky. That one's tricky because then you get into the whole freedom of speech thing, and I'm not going on that it's freedom of speech. Like the people should say, "Hey, I want to kill all Jewish people" or whatever. Um, but yeah, that's a tricky one. But I do know what you're saying by political opinion be protected and tolerated. Like it's a weird thing. Um, yeah, I don't think America really knows how to tackle nuance, like restricting basic conflicts of liberty. But when it comes to nuanced stuff, we have no idea um, what to do. And I really like this line: America's prioritized the liberty to hate and cause fear over the liberty to be free of hate and fear. Um, because the American identity is based around freedom of speech. So if someone is in a society where it's less acceptable to be a Nazi, if they come to America, they can say whatever they want. And this country, just like the gun thing, its DNA is freedom of speech. So that is not something that can realistically be taken from them or something that they have to worry about because they're like, I can say whatever I want. I can rally people who I want because freedom of speech is ingrained in the United States DNA. And so, because of that, it's these nuanced things. It's impossible to combat them, I guess, because if the groups blatantly start running around shooting everyone, something will happen. Well, I think something will happen. At this point, I don't even know. But the groups spreading misinformation, spreading fear, spreading lies can cause damage in less obvious ways than going around shooting people, and in a way that it's also more dangerous because subtlety can do a lot of damage, and it's damage that you can't see and you can't predict, and it's harder to respond to than like I guess a shooting, because a shooting, like, it's clear what happened there, but like hate speech and misinformation, that's a lot more um, foggy. And this thing 100% agree. Racial rage resultant from the dethroning of from its dethroning as racial superior. Yeah, that this entire point you made is perfect, because this is what happened. Obama was opposed for no reason other than his blackness. Yeah, no, this entire thing, I 100% agree with it. And I mean, during the Obama, we were old enough to like get it, but I don't think it was as, um, the vehement, whatever, intolerance wasn't as obvious. And so I do think that when you say progressive had grown complacent and failed to see the extent that is what happened, we definitely let our guard down. And I think we were very assured of ourselves and very ignorant. But when it happened, we were not prepared to combat it, because we were not. No one is taught, and it is not enforced to combat the subtle dangers of white supremacy and Nazism. If someone breaks into a store, you can call the police to come. Now that the police is a whole different issue right now. But if someone spreads misinformation that leads to a rash of break-ins at some other point, or leads to the people living there being uncomfortable and leave of their own volition, or leads to more subtle things, that's a lot harder to attack. I the efforts at revolution have been met by reluctance and fear. I think that social media has fucked it all up. Beyond the point of return in terms of revolutions, because I don't believe that you can coherently have a successful revolution if the platform that you're advertising the revolution, there are memes right below the tenets and values you're talking about of your revolution. If the Declaration of Independence, like every other paragraph, had a meme, it would be harder to rally around. If Martin Luther King's speeches had ad breaks, it would be harder to rally around. And so social media has definitely made it harder at revolution to move beyond the reactionary stage, because where do you go from there? Because outside of Greta Thunberg, I don't know if any of the revolutions have a clear face. Like, Greta is the face. Like, we have someone as a face for the global warming, but in terms of the recent George Floyd, who is the face of the opposition to that? We don't really have any, because everyone has their own platform to speak and everyone has their own opinions, and no one is willing to be quiet long enough to respect the rights of others, because the way that they're getting the information is a mix of seeing it in memes and also seeing it on comments, and just like, instead of learning, just wanting to destroy the other person. Because I think comments is kind of inherently a dick measuring contest, where when you're you don't go to comments to learn, especially comments on things that political, to learn anything. You go to say what you believe and like make yourself feel intellectually superior. So no one's listening and everyone has a platform to speak. I feel like I'm going on a tangent here that's a bit off of what you're talking about, but that's that's more my reason why I think the revolutions are kind of. The thing I've noticed is like I haven't heard about George Floyd in a while. I hear about Breonna Taylor still, but it seems to have died down, which is strange because it seemed to be something. It's like this is real, and I feel like we have started to settle into the wait for the next thing um, kind of area. Oh, I agree with your progress thing, because it's like yeah, there is no unified. There's not like a video game. Like there's not a skill tree. Things don't just because things happen don't doesn't mean that it's always for the benefit. Like there's no end goal where everything's perfect. Nothing is leading to everything being perfect, and so I do agree. It doesn't go from worse to better. In fact, it goes up and down a lot because you could argue better was when social media came. You could also make an equally valid argument that worse is when social media came, and I'm kind of leaning on the outside of Snapchat. I think Snapchat's all right, but Facebook, especially Facebook, I do think the world is in some fundamental ways worse off because of the progress of Facebook. Yeah, it's like, oh, we're always going upwards, always trying to become more perfect. That's not, that's not, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting seeing the revolutions of yesterday and comparing them to the revolutions today, because the revolutions of yesterday had their narrative and had their story. And so it's easier to understand it and easier to be clear, oh, these were the good guys. Like you hear it's easier to know who the good guys were because after or good guys are there ever good guys? It's easier to tell who those people were because in the aftermath, time has spent to and the stories have been told and the revolution or whatever ended or got what it wanted, but it's the beginning, middle, and end, so it's easier to comprehend it. When a revolution is happening, it's harder to know what to make of it or really understand what your actions during the revolution will look like in the future, because you're living in it. It's not a set in stone thing. You could argue history is never set in stone. It's more a less rigid thing than the revolutions of the past. I feel like I'm kind of going off what you're talking about, but the thing is, like, I essentially agree with everything you're saying, so I'm just trying to find some different things to say, I guess, about it. I do, I do think the, I don't know how to say this without sounding weird, but I do think the point you made about the Harry Potter and Hunger Games taught us to recognize encroaching intolerance and tyranny and being brave over being complacent. I don't know if I entirely disagree because I think for a lot of people those stories were just fun. And I don't know if people walked out of the Hunger Games or out of Harry Potter with a recognition of tyranny, or because in those books tyranny is clear cut and it's not as complex as real life, and I think they're to most people they're more good stories than training to recognize anything. I entirely understand what you're saying, but I kind of disagree because couldn't that apply to any story in human history where there was an oppressive force being challenged by a minority. And then with that argument, wouldn't you say they were trained to recognize tyranny, but if that tyranny continued since that point? So I think out of all of the things you're saying, and it's not like you're wrong because I get it. I just don't think it. The results of those stories were the same, I guess, in terms of training as they were in terms of entertainment you can relate to and worlds you can escape to. But I don't think they were necessarily training because it's also, you could get into the whole thing. The movies themselves, like in terms of movies, were created by these corporations which are screwing the world over, screwing people over. The stories of rebellion and teaching us to reject tyranny were created by an arm of the tyranny itself in terms of the corporations and movie studios and the movie execs with all this infinite money. So that one I don't agree with, but I get what you're saying. I really like the expect us to change the world while working 9 to 5. And embrace complacency as an act of maturity is a wonderful line. I think this, all you say is fire, and I can't say it any better. I think you spelled meager wrong, but maybe it's a more European way of spelling meager. I don't know. It looks like it could be a different spelling of it, but I think numbly optimistic about the lives we have, and it's funny how messages change the world and all that can also lead to complacency. Yeah, I think out of this whole thing, I really like the last part the most about how I think a lot of people have this idea that there is a narrative they have to follow, and life is a very specific thing, and if you're not doing that, then you're a failure, which I think is also a cause of the pandemic of mental like depression and suicidality, is that if you're in a world of infinite variables, if you're raised to believe there are certain variables you have to do or you're not worthy as a living being, I don't know how anyone could ever feel good about their lives at any point. And that will, yeah, that's just sort of what it is. Yeah, I agree with the not tolerating intolerance because it negates tolerance. Just the question is, how do you put that into reality? I guess because it's easier to say work actively towards society, defend it against stuff, but then it's like the next step is how. How do you do it? Um, but yeah, no, I agree. I agree with pretty much everything. I do think that you put too much into the effects of children. And this isn't me trying to be like, and I have no emotion and I hate stories. Stories have a lot of value. I love stories. I love entertainment. I think they're inspiring, but I think they're more inspiring like personally in terms of shaping you as a person than teaching you to directly combat oppression, I guess. But I think it was a really, really well written essay. I think it'd be cool to publish it. Like I like it. It's been 30 minutes, so I'll probably stop. But I liked it.